Okay, you guys ready to start? All right, let's roll on. We'll let David.
Madam Chairman, members of the commission, I'd like to begin this by stating a couple of things. You have before you two documents, a roadway improvement agreement that's been prepared after substantial consultation with your engineering consultants, your engineering staff. Legal staff has been involved. I'd like to thank Mr. Brown for her work on this. This is a template for general overall use. The roadway improvement agreement is not specific to any individual project. Any agreement for any individual project is by nature going to have specific terms that are outside of the general terms. But based upon recent activity that the county's been involved in, it's been identified that we really did not have what I would term a comprehensive plan for how to deal with special use permits or other projects that would involve the substantial improvement of public roadways. Specifically, how those public roadways would be improved, what standard would be applied, the cost sharing with respect to that, and the mechanisms and procedures to be followed for those programs. So the roadway improvement agreement that you have before you is that draft document. It's a draft document. It's not a final document. So this is capturing a work session. That's truly what it is. We need to work on this. You've got a very good in-house engineering staff. You've got a very qualified consulting engineer. They are available to provide you guidance on this issue. The second document you have before you is captioned Roadway Improvement Agreement Term Sheet, and it contains a comparison between the Roadway Improvement Agreement that is before you and an earlier submitted development agreement by Kaw Valley Industries, whatever Kaw Valley, I'll term that, with respect to their initial proposal for the improvement of a haul route from their proposed sand dredging operations to their other plans. So I believe you're familiar with that. That is, in fact, kind of the initiating force for this, but it's not really the driving force. The driving force is how to, in a comprehensive fashion and consistent fashion, deal with proposals, proposed developments that require the improvement of public roadways. And that's where we start.
Can I ask a question? This is the roadway portion of the larger template that you're going to be submitting if there's some organization that wants to have a major development. Will we be seeing the template for the rest of the what you're going to be submitting, typically to a large developer?
You're talking about homes, not businesses.
Well, like if somebody like Hills Pet Nutrition was going to come in, or a large industry, or this would be the roadway improvement portion of that. But are you also developing a template for the rest of that type of a development agreement?
I think you're referencing like the terms of a conditional use or a special use permit. So yes, we are working on a template that we'll use as far as language in all SUPs, but because of the unique nature of development, it might be hard to have a template, just a single template that says this is what will apply to everybody. But there will be some that we're going to ask everybody depending upon the size of the development. So in the roadway agreement, what we've discussed is that we require, we already have in our policies that if you hit a certain traffic threshold, you have to do a traffic study, right? That's already in our regulations per se. So if they get to that point and they have to do a traffic study, and the traffic study says the roadway that is being anticipated is not sufficient to, or the increased traffic with staff's review is not sufficient to handle that kind of traffic, that's when we go to this template that says, moving forward, any development, you're going to have to follow this. So that's kind of the what kicks this portion off. The other one, that, like the special conditions, I'll just use the two developments that are going on in the Kansas City area right now. We'll use Hills since it's here. 60 employees with maybe, I don't know their truck count. That would be something that the city probably has. But let's say 60 employees and maybe 10 trucks a day versus the battery plant, the Panasonic plant, that's going to be 4,000 employees with 60 trucks probably in a 4-hour period. So what their impact is and what we're going to have conditions on them, also what they're producing is going to be a little bit different. So a template there is going to be a little more difficult as far as environmental. I think that's what you're referencing, like any environmental requirements and stuff like that. But we are working on language that would be applicable to everyone, and then the more specific we wouldn't do until we actually had an applicant.
Easements, how do we go about that?
You mean like
Just say a road
if there's a roadway improvement?
Yeah.
So the project will be, as anticipated in the current language that you have here, the project will be a county project.
Okay.
It will just be the source of funding. And this just lays out at the steps. So, step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1 is, first of all, determine the best route, right? If we don't know what the route is, we can't tell whether the route is sufficient to handle the traffic. So we would have a firm come in and determine the best route. Then from that, we would meet with the applicant and say, well, this route doesn't meet the needs, so here's step 2, which is now it's going to get a complete engineering analysis. And I'm just going from memory here, so if I miss a step, Bill can correct me. But that's what the plan for is that the applicant, before they ever come to the county, can have a copy of this and know this is what we're going to be expected to do if we want to do business in the county. It's a good practice so that there's no surprises. And when we don't deal with this on a regular basis, you forget things. If it's 3 to 4 years between applications, you might forget something that you've learned through the School of Hard Knocks. We're trying to get that into this document. And like every practice that we do, as we learn, we update it. So if we learn something that we missed in this one, we will add it to the next one.
So it would be a county project, and if necessary, the county would use eminent domain for any road improvement.
Yes.
And when you said something about 10 years in here, so would this be something they would make payments for 10 years and we would bond it?
No, the 10-year reference is that the county's participation in this project will simply be what we would have saved by building the road. We were going to do maintenance on that stretch of road. So what we've said is the maintenance we were going to put into this over a 10-year period will be our contribution to the project, because we were going to spend that money one way or the other. By building if they have to make significant improvements, they're taking that off of the table for us so we could have that money freed up that we could put into the project.
So we would not be charging traffic impact fees so much a year or anything?
Not on a project like this that's being contemplated, because they are basically funding their impact fees via the road. So,
Up front.
right.
And then they're done.
That is.
So,
But let me just say that, again, depending upon the nature of the project, that could be a little different. But yes,
Okay.
that's how I anticipate this would work out on a huge project where we're requiring the rebuilding of a road along a large portion of Paul Road. That would be their impact fees.
So your traffic impact, rather than a traffic impact fee, now we're doing, if you have X amount of traffic, you have to have a study, and if the road needs to be fixed, that's your responsibility, rather than a traffic impact fee.
Now, if they happen to be on a road that, if we did the study and they said, yeah, the road can handle it, then there would be a traffic impact fee to that road, because we're not doing a rebuild. So depending on their off-site improvements can offset the impact fee if they have any. If they don't, then there's going to be an impact fee.
Commissioner Smith, if I might, with respect to any exercise of eminent domain, the county has adopted policies regarding procedures by which we would acquire easements in right-of-way up to and past eminent domain. domain. So that component, I think, has already been dealt with.
Right, and I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be on the developer, because the developer can't do eminent domain.
Right.
I mean, you don't want one person holding up a project because they just refuse, and then
And
public can't use it.
And the county has the right of eminent domain specifically with respect to roadways and sewers, not with respect to general economic development.
So, if the studies are done and it says, this road's got 10 years of life, you're not going to affect it, we would come up with a yearly traffic impact.
Yes.
Okay. And that would be forever. And would the county be putting in their 10 years maintenance money toward that?
Not in that case because they're not making any offsite improvements.
Okay. All right.
I think in this case, what we're looking at here, this is under the assumption that we've done that initial study, and they are going to have to make offsite improvements.
Right.
That's where this agreement comes into place.
Okay.
Where you're talking about is a lot less, which is we've done the initial study, and we've said that you have an impact, but it's not to the point where we're going to have to require offsite improvements. That's what you're referencing. It wouldn't be part of this contract.
Then what about the end of, say, 10 years? I mean, well, I guess the traffic impact fee would keep the road up. Or it wouldn't have
Again,
to.
depending upon the project. So.
Okay. I just have one more question, Mike, and then I'll let you have it. So what if a company moves in an area that's zoned, they build the road, and all of a sudden another company moves in, and the road's already built that they had paid for? Is there any chance of the first company getting part of their money back?
So, that's a tough thing because depending upon how they financed it, what you're talking about is basically like an improvement district. And when you create improvement districts, you have to bring all properties in. And this is anticipating off-site improvements, which they're improving the roadway that other people are live on, and are you going to bring them into that improvement district? So if you create an improvement district and another business comes in, then it lowers everybody's bill, right? Mm-hmm. But if you don't create an improvement district, I don't know the process that we would use to give those people money back. Now, the new company coming in would have to pay an impact fee because the road's already been improved. They would be paying an impact fee for the maintenance on that road to help offset the county's expenditures. So,
This doesn't seem fair. The first guy in pays everything.
That happens a lot of times.
I know it does. But just, if there's any way we can be fair about this.
Commissioner, the term that's used is a clawback provision. There could be a mechanism on certain fact-dependent. For example, if I improved a roadway for my specific project, and during the lifespan of that road, you came in with, say, a similarly sized project, the county could take steps to recoup some of the that I expended from you. Then the complication is, does it go back to me or does it go to the county? So it could be, the formula could be worked out, but it's going to be very, very fact dependent and could complicate matters.
Well, I'm sure we'd have to have a sunset on it too, because you can't expect somebody to 20 years from now, but you don't expect somebody 20 months from now to be able to jump on a new road after someone else paid for it. That's all I have.
I was just looking at this. I just received this roadway improvement agreement term sheet, and you have Call Valley and then the new template. Is there any key differences that we should
I would
hone into, or
I would tell you that this document is the important document. We just gave you some highlights on the difference between what the original application was, but it's really not germane to this conversation.
okay? Because I just wondered if there was any key. It looks like that, like AASHTO standards here would be determined by an engineer over here,
Commissioner Stephen, if I
Yes, the
might.
standards are set.
right? But apparently there's
different standards for
Right.
AASHTO. There's like low volume roads, higher volume roads, different. So we'll use AASHTO standards, But whatever ASHTO standards the engineer determines are most applicable to them.
For that project.
Commissioner
Okay.
Stephen, if I might, the salient difference is this, and Mark alluded to it in his opening comments. This project would be a county road improvement project. It would be up to county standards and be controlled by the county because at the end of the day, it's going to be a public roadway, not a private industrial road. So the concept is that the county would be the controlling agency because the county has the ultimate responsibility for that road and to the taxpayers. So that would be the primary difference. It's more emphasis on county control and county determination of the parameters of the road improvements rather than an individual developer.
So when we originally made the agreement with Call Valley, or tried to make the agreement, they were going to have some involvement with the improvement of the road. But now, we would now go and just contract it out exclusively by the county.
They would, if their business is building roads, they would have the ability to bid on the project.
To bid on the project?
Yes.
Okay.
And Commissioner Stephen, also, as Mark alluded to, this process is broken down into components and they graduate through. The initial step is the evaluation of a route, and then the second step is the development of a concept to try to get an estimate of the potential cost of the project. At that point, a developer could back out and say this is not a viable business proposal. So there will be input from the developer because the developer is funding this process, but the process has several steps. At each step, the developer has the option to either proceed with the project or terminate the project.
How's this work when it's city and county shared road?
Well, obviously,
Have to be an old one because we don't have any of that.
there are existing roads, obviously, that have where half the road is in the city. We just talked about one earlier today. Half the roads in the city and half the roads in the county. Any of those things require a partnership. So we don't have the authority to go in a city and make requirements or demands on them. So it would have to be some form of a partnership.
What, say the city doesn't support what the county's trying to do.
Then
Then
I
you
would,
can't
Road
Yeah.
just stays what it stays, is what it
Yeah.
is.
then I would guess there would be no development.
Or the county makes a decision that they're going to absorb the entire cost. It's one or the other. I mean, is that a no
Well, I can't see
development?
that happening.
Well, I'm just saying, but that is the,
An option.
Not a good option, but it's an option. But anyways. And let's see. Okay, so there's nothing, well, no, it's either traffic impact fee or.
the road improvement.
And we can, if the commission would like, we can try to work on some clawback language that would be generic enough that we could apply it to most situations.
Commissioner Smith, I think the analogy you would understand because you and I both have background that the extension of a water main. When subsequent users hook onto that, they do pay a contribution. In this case, that contribution, rather than going to the water district, could go to the initially funding developer.
Well, I was just trying to think, well, say, is this going to be a county project? Say, you can bond it, and then the company could make payment on the bond through like a traffic impact fee, even though they'd be paying the whole.
Yeah, that would be creating a revenue bond, which I would highly discourage the county to ever get involved in. I think
Okay.
what this anticipates is the applicant funds it up front.
Okay.
Now, you can sell bonds, and I've done this before in other developments where you can sell bonds and the developer buys their own bonds, or if they can find somebody who would like to buy those bonds, they can. But it's not a general obligation of the county. In this situation, a traffic impact fee as a revenue source would be very, very difficult to get any activity on the bond market.
Any clawback would have to be limited. I mean, it might have to be prorated, but also to 10 years, period, because then, you know, that's as long
Well,
as this.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful of that. So the initial company comes in and they have to make this offsite improvement, the roadway.
Right.
And then another company comes in who's maybe even larger. And their impact is going to be pretty significant. If you give away your impact fees to the original developer, who's going to keep the road up? The county. Once the road's built, it's ours. So I think that's why it's tough to come up with language that's generic enough that, but we can work on it.
There needs to be some
That
prorated.
a percentage of
Right.
it or something along those lines. So, and maybe it's a smaller company and then it's not as big a deal. But in this case, you know, if you had like let's say a battery plant or a chip plant that came in and they were actually bigger than the original developer, it wouldn't be fair to the original developer, but also you don't want the county to give up our only revenue source to help maintain that during that period. So
Right.
it's all about the engineering, and I hate to push it all off on that completely, and that's why we're trying to have this document. But a portion of that at the time, one of the things that we require is that the engineers will calculate what the impact actually is. So if a new applicant comes in, they're going to calculate that impact, and then the county is going to have to determine, you know what, we can charge this impact fee that will simply take care of maintenance on this road, or we can charge an impact fee that will help to reimburse the original developer. And I think the 10 years was the amount of years we used from the county side. I wouldn't expect we would go past that.
Right, that's why I said we could not possibly consider.
And that'd be 10 years from the original construction,
Right.
not 10 years from the new development.
Right.
Can you kind of, for people in general, how compare where we're at now with a large project coming in compared to where we were when we started with the Call Valley, and as far as we're not paying for all the engineering studies, that we're
Yeah.
putting that on the
This
developer.
This development agreement, and this is a roadway improvement agreement, but as part of any development agreement, the costs are at the expense of the developer. It's not the county picking up. So any of these steps that are in there, we'll let the developer know what the cost is going to be before we move forward, and they have to provide the funds, and then we move forward. So, there's still the initial review that part of any application that the county is responsible for that initial review, like with any developer, whether it be residential or commercial. But after we get past that point, then it goes to them.
And that's different than where we were at.
Yes, that is
Because
different.
we were actually absorbing a lot of those.
Well, we were absorbing a lot of the review back and forth, yes.
So I think that's fair for people to know that we have.
We've
I feel like
addressed
that
that
we
concern.
that's a change that we've
Yes.
made that I think is really
It's a positive change.
yeah.
And again, like I said before, you learn as you go. When you don't have these coming in on a weekly, monthly, annual basis, you're not prepared for it. So the first time it comes in, you do your best, and you learn, and you try to tweak the system. And this is a tweak from what we learned from the last time.
Yeah.
It's a big tweet from Brush Green.
Huh?
It's a big tweet from Brush Green.
Yeah.
You guys don't mind. 400 or 500 Brush Green.
Speak up.
I got some. Talking about the old form that just gets filled out, and the county come out.
They were
and-
buying right away when their actual business agreements with Brush, but they thought they were transferring property by using the title. There's 400 or 500 of them.
They were just agreements to cover, tear your fence out, push the brush, and a lot of times they build the fence back.
They were about to Soxy Bay.
No,
There was a stack like that.
later than that.
Yeah, I mean,
I
they
still
started,
got some.
they started with stock.
Okay, all right, but, so, back to the traffic impact fee, is there any consideration on what the taxes these businesses would be paying, or not gonna pay taxes, is there any difference on that?
Well, as we've talked about, when you abate taxes, that's really just a tax shift,
Mhm.
not a true abatement. So that'd be a separate decision of the board. If a development came in and asked you for a tax abatement, that would be something you'd have to consider separate from this. This does not address that.
Okay.
When you're doing a development agreement, though, and you're working through it, we now have a policy on abating taxes.
Yes.
Is that plugged into part of that discussion?
It would be followed if the applicant decided they wanted to ask for an abatement. We would then follow that policy. But in this case, this is not the kind of development that would get a tax abatement.
Yeah. We're going to ask for a tax abatement, we're sure not going to want to pay for it.
Correct.
So. But at the same time, we don't want to see any business turn away because they just can't.
Depends on what kind of business.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Depends on what size
you know, we
business.
talk about the return on the investment.
That's the wrong head.
So that's what you have to
Return
get
on
to is
investment.
the return on the investment.
So if we are coming in, and you want to start paying taxes from day one, I think that's a little different deal.
If the state wants to come in and build a superhighway and all that other stuff for them, then so be it.
Yeah.
But in this instance is where we're dealing with some of
Well,
these.
we could be dealing with that too. They could make an announcement someday in Topeka and say, hey, this is going in Leavenworth County. Deal with it.
Somewhat.
So,
Commissioner, on that line, one of the concepts behind this is businesses do not like uncertainty. Certainty, on the other hand, is actually something that is attractive. Any business wishing to come into Leavenworth County that would have a substantial impact on the road system and would likely need to improve the road system would know in advance that this would be the concept they would need to follow. And I would offer it would reduce the uncertainty as to them entering into discussions with Leavenworth County and it basically being a blank sheet of paper. This gives them an idea in advance of what they could expect, and again, that reduces the uncertainty.
and I agree. But if we have a road that we share with the city and the city doesn't have the same policy,
Then you have
a half a
uncertainty.
road improved.
You have uncertainty.
That's what I'm saying. We still have uncertainty when it comes to border roads.
That's just the nature of the game.
Yeah.
And until we get rid of anything that is, where that's the
Left over.
situation. Right.
But if you're not in the loop that these businesses are coming and they're announcing they're here, and then there's a road out front that needs fixed, how do we deal with that?
That's the question before us, isn't it?
Well,
That's a question that will be coming up very soon.
Okay.
Come up today, I guess, if you all wanted to discuss that.
Is it on the agenda? I think we probably
Probably
should,
should.
Okay.
please
That should be
not.
its own separate
Yep.
discussion.
Okay.
This isn't the time, place for
I mean, I think this is a good start. I don't know if this is a finished product or not.
No, I don't anticipate this as a finished product. What we really want to do is get your first initial discussion. We do have an applicant right now for a project that this would apply to, and so this would be our starting point with them. So if you have changes you'd like to see, we'd like to get that feedback before we send it over to them. Because what we don't want to do is get in a situation where it's fine if we're more strict than you think we should be, but if we're not as strict enough, that's a problem. Because when you send this over to the developer and then you later say, well, you know what, we want to add this, it's going to be a little more of a challenge. If you say we want to take this away, they're probably not going to complain. So just if you have anything that we missed that you think, you should have got this, please let us know. We would anticipate probably the first part of next week sending this over to the applicant. So that gives you a few days if anything comes up. If there's something significant, we'll put it back on a work session immediately.
And you're sending this over with the applicant, but I assume you're sending other.
Yes, there will be other requirements too. Yeah.
Commissioner Stephen, you're referencing the two documents I sent you earlier this week. Those are the environmental issues and conditions that would be applied.
And this is basically
This is just,
sending them what they need to respond to.
Yes.
Okay, on page 4 is the language on dispute resolutions. Is that boilerplate, typical language?
no.
I mean, it's always reviewable by the courts, right?
Right, it is. So part of this is going through it is looking at making sure it's going to withstand and that it has some due process built into it so that if the consultant picked by us comes back with something that they think is completely egregious, there is an avenue to discuss it.
And it's so long as it goes in front of the commissioners and we're not quote unquote arbitrary and capricious, then our ruling typically would be upheld.
Well, Commissioner, I always presume that you are not arbitrary and capricious.
Well, we are not.
Now, the purpose of the dispute resolution, as Misty said, is to provide a due process avenue short of just terminating the process. It would allow the developer to come forward and say, I disagree with your engineer's opinion on this matter, and it creates a forum for that to be resolved. Please note that the final determining body is the Board of County Commissioners, subject to, of course, the possible district court review.
And when a district court reviews a county commission decision on such a thing, what's their standard of review? Do they typically uphold the...
They defer to your judgment as long as it is based on a rational basis and is not arbitrary and capricious.
Must be reasonable.
There's those words.
The word reasonable.
And it can go all the way to the Supreme Court before anybody says different.
That is true.
And it has.
Commissioner, the purpose of this is to possibly avoid that scenario.
Right, now we have, but we've learned some valuable lessons
things on the
along the
way.
way. And we're trying to improve the process, and I think that this is a substantial improvement from where we began. And thank the staff for
Yeah, I think you
their
did a good
work,
job on it.
because, we can get the input, as has been said, if there's anything that you'd like to add. I don't think there's anything we want to take out personally, but.
No, I think that's,
It was a good starting
But
point. I
make
think you've done a
notes
good job on it.
and share them,
Well,
or we can discuss now. I mean, give direction.
well, I mean, it's not going to fit all businesses, maybe, I don't know.
again, the smaller businesses will never reach this, right?
Right.
You have to reach, and
traffic impact.
I don't want to put Bill on the spot, but or Amy, but in our process, we have a calculation that says when you reach this many easels, I believe, then the impact, and you have to do a traffic study. Well, when you reach that, that's when this starts to come into play. So the smaller businesses that don't reach that threshold would never even see this.
And then we need to remember that if a business happens, because we're no longer looking at all of the SUPs or whatever, and a business happens to hit a certain threshold, if they have hit that, then they have made a substantial change to the original, or there's a substantial change to the original special use permit, which could trigger in and of itself, if I'm not mistaken, a need for, if their business happens to boom, explode. Well,
They need a
then
new special use.
there needs to be a
Right.
new special use permit, and then that would trigger.
It could trigger this.
It could trigger this
Yeah.
at that point, but not before that,
Right.
if I'm not mistaken.
Commissioner, perhaps conceptually this might help. Traffic impact fee is to work towards the contribution of the maintenance of a road.
Right.
This deals with the improvement of a road. If all I'm doing is putting additional vehicles, easels on a roadway that is capable of handling it, I pay my share of the anticipated increase in maintenance. If because of my proposed development, the geometrics of the road need to be improved, culverts need to be replaced,
Right.
there need to be substantial improvements, that's when this agreement would come into play.
Right.
If I had an existing special use permit or use, and it grew to the point where there had been such a substantial change in the character of it, yes, this would come into play.
Right, that's what I think that's.
So, if engineering determines there's 10 years left in this road, and then so we charge the traffic impact fee for 10 years, what if the end of 10 years and the road's near the end of life?
So some of it depends, again, upon the nature of the business that's applying it. Like we have in the case that we discussed before, is a 20-year application for an SUP. If the road's life is 10 years and they're going to be there for 20 years, that has to be taken into consideration. If there are other improvements that need to be made immediately, and it's only going to last 10 years, that has to be taken into consideration. Those are the things that we have to look at as part of this. So if you have a business that comes in and said, we're asking for a 20-year SUP, or maybe it's forever, whatever it is, and we say, well, this road isn't going to hold up, and we're going to have to make major improvements to it before you can even open, and within 10 years, we're going to have to redo the entire road. Then that's when you talk about this. This is you're going to do it. You're going to have to do it up front because that's not on our capital improvement project. If it's a road that's already existing that can handle the traffic, then it's just the new impact on that roadway. And that's where the negotiation gets into as far as development agreements go, like a Hills, that it's going to contribute a significant amount to your economy. You may waive that. That's a conversation that you can have. But if instead it's just a business that has a lot of heavy truck traffic that really isn't adding to the economy, then you have to have some other way of recouping that cost.
So we also, there's a group out with our Port Authority and LCDC looking for additional industrial parks. So that's something that, say, if they do find and purchase, this needs to be part of that. If there's going to be, we're going to a ribbon cutting, there's going to be a new future industrial park there.
It's in the
So
county.
they'll
It's in the county.
need to know that all this applies to any business coming in.
Well, but more than likely, it's going to be something that we share a road with the city, because it's not going to be so far out that there's not going to be sewer, and all the necessary infrastructure for an industrial park.
I think most of the cities now, if they have sewer, they're requiring annexation. And so if they're going to require annexation, then our new policy comes into play, and they annex the entire road, not half the road, and therefore then it wouldn't be our concern in that strip. Maybe the impact down the road might be, and that's where.
And that's another improved policy compared to what we've done in the past.
Or we wouldn't have these half of roads.
Right.
So on one of the projects, there was a estimate of 7 years on a road, and then we burned now 3 years. And I'm assuming that old study applies, or do we have to redo the studies?
Yes.
Okay.
Traffic patterns have changed in that area completely. I mean, there have been new homes built.
You're getting Panasonic.
There's a lot that has changed in 3 years. So, yeah, those studies are good for a little while, but they're not in the case where you have a lot of growth in the area.
Well, we burned a lot of time for 7 years. Now you're down to like 3 years.
Well, and again, that was 7 years based on the increased traffic.
Right.
So without the increased traffic, it's probably still 10 to 15, maybe 20 years. But we won't know until they actually do the study. So it might still be 7
It's been
years.
through maintenance cycles since then. So,
We can hold up to what it's got now. The traffic is got
Yes.
now.
well, that's another, you bring up a good point. We could get some overflow from DeSoto.
Oh, I think we're going to.
Well, so,
Yeah.
and we can't do nothing about that.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have trucks cutting through to go to County Route 1 to get on the turnpike or something.
Well, I think it changes the character of the neighborhood, doesn't it?
You build one bar, it changes the character of the neighborhood.
I'm just saying that Panasonic plant wasn't taken into account when we went through this before, and now it's something that should be taken into account.
We're going to get the overflow. I mean, we will know this. Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of houses built.
Potentially.
There's already houses being built. They're still building.
Not like they were.
No, but I personally think you did a great job on this. And
I think there's a few small tweaks we'll make, and there's probably just some some editing that needs to be done in here.
One thing I wanted to add, put a clawback like he was talking about.
We'll work on language that can be considered. Again, it has to be generic enough that it would apply to almost every situation. You can't find something that applies to everything, but
That's gonna
we'll
be
try to
hard
get it.
work.
We'll try to get it where it applies to
It needs to be
nearly.
graduated. I mean,
Yeah.
no matter what, limit to 10 years, and then there needs to be a graduation of, or however you want to put it, so that there's, it's not.
Well,
You want to be as fair as you can.
Well, and I want to just before we get
Not where we give away
before we get
rights.
done today, I just want to do a couple of things. One, I want to reiterate thanks to the legal staff for working through this, but more importantly, our internal staff with Bill
Yep.
and our new engineer Joe, they were able to do a lot of this in house. We didn't have that capability before. When we did the last time this came through, we did not have that capability before. We have that now because of their staff.
Isn't
And
that exciting?
it is, and so when we start talking about clawbacks, it's nice to know that that's something we can probably sit down in a room with our current staff and actually come up with the language that works. But I'm super thankful that we have the staff that we have, and that the changes we've made over the last several years have it's paying dividends to the county, and you may not see it today, but you will see it in things like this going forward.
I agree, 100%.
Well, I can just say I've only done this for 3.5 years, 4 years, whatever it's been, and the professionalism has every year it's getting better and better. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't good, but it's getting better.
And so is the pay. So you've got
But
to
you get what you pay for, too.
You've got to
Yeah.
pay these employees to stay. Got to pay to attract them and retain them.
No peanuts,
I want talent. You get lucky.
So we've got to stick with the pay plan for our employees. Not trying to balance the budget on the back. of
And not
our employees.
apologize for it.
And we have been giving substantial raises.
You gotta play
That seems like a
game.
conversation for a different day.
Yep.
It is, but I'm planting seeds.
I know,
So,
Commissioners, just
I
my
appreciate it,
final
and I
comment.
appreciate
Okay, we
it.
have one final comment from,
Mark's invitation to you was not spurious. You all have real-world experience in these. Some of you have very hands-on experience in road projects. Please review this, and please offer your thoughts regarding any omissions that are in this agreement, anything you would like to see added to it. So your input, you are the policymakers, please provide policy guidance.
take it home.
do you anticipate that when this is sent out, that you'll then get a response saying we want to do it different, or we want to negotiate how this is done, or?
Sure.
I do anticipate that I will get that kind of response.
And
yes.
your response to that is going to be what?
This is not a negotiation process. This is a policy of the board. Staff does not have the ability to negotiate these terms.
And that is correct. We have not granted that authority.
So,
Sounds like you said that before.
On point.
Well,
okay.
All right, well,
We're good?
we're done.